Ever wondered how a country can just disappear? Welcome to Class Bites. Today, we're diving into the chilling story of Austria's Anschluss and how it vanished into Nazi Germany. How does a sovereign nation simply vanish from the map, absorbed into its larger, more aggressive neighbor without a single shot fired in its defense? This was the stark reality for Austria in the spring of 1938, when the long-held dream of Anschluss, the political union of Austria with Germany, was brutally realized through the annexation orchestrated by Adolf Hitler. The event was not a sudden impulse, but the culmination of decades of simmering nationalism, geopolitical maneuvering, and the unchecked ambition of the Nazi regime, a critical turning point that set a darkened stage for the cataclysm to come. The origins of this momentous union stretch back into the ashes of the First World War, an era defined by defeat and the redrawing of European borders. The peace treaties that concluded the Great War, most notably the Treaty of Versailles, were designed to dismantle the old empires and prevent future conflicts by imposing severe restrictions on the defeated powers. A central tenet of this new order was an express prohibition against the unification of Germany and the newly formed Republic of Austria. European leaders, haunted by the memory of German militarism, harbored a deep-seated fear that a combined German-Austrian state would be far too large and powerful, upsetting the delicate balance of power they sought to establish. This prohibition, however, ran contrary to a powerful undercurrent of pan-German nationalism. The very idea of an Anschluss, a unified state that would form a greater Germany, had been a potent political concept long before Hitler's rise. It first gained traction after the unification of Germany in 1871, a process led by Prussia that deliberately excluded Austria and its millions of German-speaking Austrians from the new German Empire. For decades, the dream remained dormant, but it was powerfully revived following the collapse of the sprawling Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1918. With their vast multi-ethnic empire gone, many Austrians fell to drift, a small remnant of a once great power, and the idea of joining their German brethren gained significant popular support. It was into this fertile ground of national grievance and thwarted ambition that Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party sowed their seeds of radical change. They viewed the entire post-World War I European map as an illegitimate and unfair construct, a punitive settlement designed to humiliate and contain the German people. Central to their ideology was the claim that Germans, scattered across various newly formed nations, had been cruelly denied the fundamental right of self-determination. Redrawing these borders became a core objective of the Nazi agenda, a violent revisionism that would allow them to achieve two overarching and intertwined goals. The first was to unite all ethnic Germans under the banner of a single, powerful Nazi German empire. The second, more ominous goal was the acquisition of Lebensraum, a German term meaning living space, which envisioned a vast territorial expansion into Eastern Europe to be colonized for the benefit of the German race. The annexation of Austria was the logical and essential first step toward achieving the first of these ambitions. For Hitler, this was not merely a matter of political strategy, it was a deeply personal crusade. In his 1925 manifesto, Mein Kampf, the Austrian-born Hitler wrote with fervent conviction of his intention to forge a union between his birth country and Germany, declaring that he would accomplish this monumental task by any means necessary. The first overt attempt to force this union came in July of 1934 when Austrian and German Nazis staged a coup. The putsch was ultimately unsuccessful, but it destabilized the political landscape and led to the establishment of an authoritarian right-wing government in Austria that stood in firm opposition to Nazi influence. For several years, an uneasy tension persisted, but by 1938, Hitler felt powerful enough to escalate his pressure campaign. In February of that year, he summoned the Austrian Chancellor, Kurt von Schuschnigg, to a meeting in Germany. What transpired was not a negotiation between equals, but an exercise in political intimidation. Hitler presented Schuschnigg with a series of non-negotiable demands designed to systematically dismantle Austrian sovereignty from within.
He insisted that Schuschnigg appoint known Nazi sympathizers to key positions of power throughout the government, effectively handing the state's machinery over to Hitler's allies. The most critical of these appointments was that of Arthur Seyss-Inquart as Minister of Public Security. This was no mere cabinet reshuffle. The position came with full and unlimited control over the entirety of Austria's police forces, placing the state's instruments of law and order directly into the hands of a dedicated Nazi. Initially, Schuschnigg appeared to capitulate, but upon returning to Austria, he made a final, desperate gamble to preserve his country's independence. He repudiated the coercive agreement and boldly announced that a plebiscite, a direct national vote, would be held on the question of the Anschluss. This act of defiance infuriated Hitler, who saw it as a personal betrayal and a challenge to his authority. His response was swift and merciless. On the 11th of March 1938, he issued a stark ultimatum, threatening an immediate and overwhelming invasion of Austria. His demands were simple and absolute. Chancellor von Schuschnigg must resign at once. The plebiscite must be cancelled, and the Nazi Arthur Seyss-Inquart must be appointed as his replacement. Cornered and utterly isolated, with no promise of support from other European powers, Schuschnigg was bullied into submission. He cancelled the plebiscite and, in a final act of capitulation, he obediently resigned his office, issuing a solemn order to the Austrian army not to offer any resistance to the German forces he knew were coming. The very next day, on the 12th of March, German troops poured across the border not as conquerors met with resistance, but as a force greeted by staged and genuine outpourings of enthusiasm from segments of the Austrian population. This carefully orchestrated welcome provided Hitler with the political cover he needed to abandon any pretense of a negotiated union. On the 13th of March, he moved to annex Austria outright, formally incorporating it into the German Reich. To legitimize this act of aggression in the eyes of the world, a controlled plebiscite was held on the 10th of April. With Nazi stormtroopers supervising the polls and all opposition silenced, the result was a foregone conclusion. A reported 99.7% of voters approved the union. By annexing Austria, the Nazis had not only achieved a long-held ideological goal, but they had also flagrantly violated both the Treaty of Versailles and the Treaty of Saint-Germain, the specific agreement that had formally dissolved the Habsburg Empire and established the Austrian Republic. The Anschluss was a thunderous declaration of Nazi disdain for the entire post-World War I European order, a clear signal that they would not be bound by international law or diplomatic agreements. This brazen act of territorial expansion, the very first committed by Nazi Germany, was met with a deafening silence from the international community. The other major European powers, particularly Britain and France, did nothing to punish the Nazis for their blatant violation of international treaties. Their passive acceptance of the Anschluss became a significant and tragic act of appeasement, a policy rooted in the desperate hope that, by granting concessions to Hitler, they could avoid another devastating war. This failure to respond, however, had the opposite effect. It was interpreted by Hitler not as a gesture of peace, but as a sign of weakness and a lack of resolve. The successful and consequence-free absorption of Austria emboldened him, confirming his belief that he could continue his expansionary policies unchecked. The appeasement over Austria directly set the stage for Germany's subsequent acts of aggression, leading to the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia and ultimately the invasion of Poland that would plunge the world into the Second World War. The fall of Austria was more than the end of a nation. It was the beginning of a far greater tragedy.
Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts or next video ideas.